Ukraine weaponized water. At 3:06 a.m. on October 26, 2025, 6 GPS-guided GMLR rounds from 3 HIMARS launchers punched holes in the Belgorod reservoir dam, and in 60 seconds turned a Russian rear logistics hub into a flooded wreck. At 00:15 a.m., October 26, 2025, 2 LEA-100 reconnaissance UAVs painted a precise thermal picture. A concealed Russian logistics node sitting one ridge behind a major reservoir. The infrared feed showed concentrated heat where personnel and materiel were staged. 8 Euro 4,320 military trucks, each loaded with between 8,820 and 11,025 pounds of artillery ammunition, and 4 CAM 5350 fuel tankers holding a combined 2,512 US gallons of diesel. A reinforced dome warehouse behind them had the signature of a battalion-level field logistics hub for the entire eastern Donetsk cluster. Analysts on the feed quantified the stockpile. More than 583,160 pounds of combined weight in fuel and ammunition, enough to sustain a mechanized battalion for roughly 48 hours without resupply. Directly behind that logistics node sat something the Russians believed was safety. A colossal dam impounding roughly 80 billion US gallons, approximately 300 million cubic meters of water. Once that fact registered on the recon feed, the operations logic changed. The reservoir was no longer just terrain to cross, it was a weapon that could be turned on the occupier. Within 15 minutes, the plan was sketched. Breach the subsidiary control cluster of the Belgorod Dam to create a directed surge downstream that would inundate the logistics node and deny any immediate river crossing, repair, or resupply effort. At 3:05 a.m., 3 HIMARS launchers were wheeled out of camouflage pits in a dense wood near Chuhuiv. Coordinates from the UAV feed were final checked, link tested, and relayed to the 16th Field Corps headquarters. 2 minutes after the last systems check, the order to fire was transmitted. Panel 2 on each launcher cycled to ready, each crew confirmed with standard confirmations. Simultaneous ignition. The 3 launchers each carried 2 GMLR rounds, the newest GPS/INS guided rockets with ranges exceeding 93 miles and a warhead specifically designed to penetrate reinforced concrete. Each warhead weighed 200 pounds, using a heavy steel casing and a shaped charge core to defeat hardened structural targets. 6 GMLR rockets lifted off, their dual GPS plus INS navigation initialized, but this was not a simple GPS-only run. As they crossed the border, GNSS guidance was turned off and navigation switched to a combined active terrain profile radar solution plus inertial navigation. A navigation profile optimized for ultra-low terrain-following flight to defeat radar and point defense. Simultaneously, northwest of Volchansk, a separate deception package launched. 2 UJ-22 decoy UAVs from a heat-resistant makeshift runway. These were improvised composite foam airframes fitted with RF emission modules and an active jamming package. Low-cost decoys engineered to emulate the radar, infrared, and seeker signatures of a Neptune cruise missile. The deception had a purposefully narrow vector. The UJ-22s flew between 492 and 656 feet altitude at 68 to 81 miles per hour, emitting continuous electronic signatures that replicated a cruise missile terminal profile. Radar cross-sections and infrared returns tuned to produce the visual and electronic fingerprint of a Neptune. At 3 a.m., a 96L6E long-range radar detected the composite signature and classified it as an inbound cruise missile. That classification triggered a Panzer S-1 battery 1.2 kilometers from the logistics node to switch to automatic engagement and track the apparent inbound vector. The air defense suite pivoted every sensor and launcher toward the northwest, precisely the approach corridor the decoys occupied. With Russian air defenses focused and tracking the electronic bait, the 6 GMLR rockets closed on the dam at ultra-low altitude, 148 to 197 feet, hugging terrain, minimizing radar exposure. They traveled at roughly Mach 3, about 2,000 to 282 miles per hour, effectively giving the defenders seconds to react. At approximately 1.86 miles out, the missile's terrain profiling algorithms refined trajectories for near-perpendicular impact angles, 85 to 90 degrees to the dam crest. That impact geometry is critical for structural defeat. Near normal impacts drive shaped charges and kinetic penetration to place blast and fragmentation, where it produces hydraulic leverage, cracks that let internal water pressure exploit and enlarge failures. Defensive options were exhausted. The Panzer battery had expended interceptors and was in a reload window. The remaining rear elements lacked effective engagement solutions at the low altitudes and speeds employed. A junior lieutenant inside a Panzer S-1 control cabin realized the incoming profile, shouted a warning, and found the system unable to act in time. At 3:07:05 a.m., the first GMLR slammed into the central spillway control area. The penetrator warhead detonated, ripping through nearly 4 inches of reinforced concrete and detonating inside the dam structure. 2 seconds later, the second round struck near the maintenance staircase and machinery chamber. Subsequent strikes struck the left and right spillway axes and the reinforced valve housings. The cumulative effect was immediate and engineered. Each warhead carried 200 pounds of penetrative explosive. 6 hits concentrated their energy into a single critical dam axis. Structural steel and pre-stressed concrete began to fail under combined blast and hydrostatic load. A metallic cracking echoed through the control room. First hairline fissures appeared, then pressure-driven weeping through the hot concrete face. Within seconds, a trickle escalated into a white, writhing torrent that exploited shattered material. At 3:07:14 a.m., the dam breached, and 1.5 seconds later, the upstream embankment began to collapse. A wall of water was released downstream. Eyewitness and recon footage captured a vertical plume exceeding 98 feet, and hydrologic estimates placed the initial surge at over 530 million US gallons moving downstream at speeds up to 43.5 miles per hour, carrying mud, rock, concrete fragments, and shockwaves. 2.5 kilometers downstream, the Russian field logistics base at the northern Lyman forest edge had been night staging personnel and materiel. More than 80 troops, logistics technicians, tanker drivers, ammunition handlers, sleeping in tents or awake on rotation. Within 5 seconds, the initial surge swept 3 Euro 4,320 trucks near the bank. Communications masts and satellite dishes collapsed. A mobile comms mast with its steel frame was ripped out of place. An electronics bunker flooded within 20 seconds. Battlefield communications across northwest Donetsk degraded and then failed. The on-scene recon feed recorded the last thermal images from observation posts. One large heat patch drifting and dispersing, the final remnant of a fuel truck being dragged downstream, engine burning. The feed died shortly thereafter. Ukrainian recon UAVs continued to circle, silently recording the destruction and preparing the strategic report that would reach Russian general staff screens within hours. At the Southern Military District Command Center in Rostov, alert signals multiplied at 3:25 a.m. Icons representing UAVs, logistics vehicles, and forward radars flipped to no contact. The supply corridor north of Lyman to east of Sloviansk, a sector that had seen heavy fighting the previous day, abruptly fell off the operational map. Reports flowed up the chain. Communications lost from the Vladimir Rivka rear base, supply routes marked unsafe. An operational telegram labeled the event, "Complete loss of logistics base Volostia due to hydrologic incident level 1. The message enumerated material losses: 8 URAL/Ural 4-320 military trucks, command vehicles, 4 CAM 5350 fuel tankers, communications gear, ammunition stores, and UAV hangars, all swept away or destroyed. Initial casualty estimates were preliminary and deliberately conservative. Tallying was impossible amidst the flooding and debris. Early field reports put personnel losses at no fewer than approximately 80. Observation Post 5 near Belgorod transmitted its last thermal picture, showing a large heat patch dispersing. The feed ended immediately after. At the front, artillery units waiting for resupply remained unaware that their rear had been erased. Rostov's southern MD shifted to tactical alert. Within 30 minutes of the breach, multiple riverine supply routes along the Seversky Donets were marked temporarily unsafe. Russian engineers were ordered to conduct terrain surveys, damage assessments, and provisional restoration plans. Sappers with floating bridge gear and hydromechanical repair teams were dispatched from Shevekino and Staroskil. Hydraulic shock in the downstream channel was extreme. Initial 2-minute flows exceeded the modeling thresholds, with peak velocities topping 43.5 miles per hour. Riverbank structures, roads, and temporary logistics infrastructure were assessed to be 30 to 70% destroyed in downstream stretches. The Russian Ministry of Defense requested satellite imagery and additional telemetry, but heavy cloud cover combined with electronic interference from flares and continued tactical UAV activity limited usable real-time data. Over the next 24 to 72 hours, units around Vovchansk, Lyman, and northwest Sloviansk would face acute supply interruptions, shortages in artillery shells, fuel, and medical equipment. Pontoon bridging and airlift were identified as the only immediate alternatives, both of which increase operational strain and expose forces to airspace pressure and interdiction risk. Attempts to sustain logistics over small resupply UAVs were trialed from Belgorod, but throughput and payload limitations made their effect marginal against the scale of material lost. If the reservoir could not be restored quickly and water levels remained critically low, the southern riverside around Spatak risked long-term geomorphological change. Roads, fords, and soft ground would be altered, complicating wheeled logistics and heavy equipment movement. Mud, boulders, and debris would block quick re-establishment of former routes. Motor pools, refueling sites, and UAV hubs would require relocation. Russian engineers estimated that even provisional restoration of a functional logistics line would take 5 to 7 days under favorable conditions, a lengthy period while active combat operations continued. This was not a conventional artillery raid or a standard UAV sortie. The operation combined precision long-range fires, terrain-following penetration tactics, and deliberate electronic deception to create a hydrologic weapon. By intentionally targeting the dam's control cluster with shaped charge penetrators and coordinating the distraction of layered air defenses, Ukraine transformed a civil hydraulic work into a campaign-shaping munition. Measured by equipment losses, supply disruption, and the immediate operational paralysis imposed on the sector, a single hydro breach achieved destructive effects comparable to several dozen high-yield HIMARS strikes against logistics assets. The key tactical lessons are concrete and replicable. Identify high-value civil engineering nodes that, if breached, can produce cascading logistical failure. Integrate standoff precision fires with low-cost electronic deception to overwhelm or distract point defenses. And use terrain-following guidance profiles to reduce interceptor windows. Operationally, the strike forced Russian command to reallocate engineering resources, bridge assets, and airlift capacity to repair and resupply, thereby reshaping the tempo of operations across the sector for days. If repeated, these hydro strike tactics impose asymmetric costs on a logistics network that relies on predictable river crossings and fixed staging hubs. Striking geographic and engineering vulnerabilities create a persistent risk of sudden fragmentation across Russian lines in Donetsk and Luhansk without necessarily engaging in protracted frontline attrition. For commanders planning force sustainment in riverine zones, the Belgorod breach is a case study. Civil infrastructure can be operationalized as a weapon, and integrated fires plus electronic deception can multiply their effect. Operational intelligence summary: coordinated use of UAV reconnaissance, GPS/INS, and terrain profile guided GMLR, rounds from HIMARS, low-cost decoy UAVs to sequester local air defenses, and a focus on near-perpendicular penetrative impacts against the dam's control and spillway structures caused a catastrophic breach. The immediate tactical outcome was the effective elimination of a battalion-level logistics node, severe disruption of multiple supply corridors, temporary loss of communications in the sector, and an operational pause for Russian forces reliant on those routes. The strategic outcome is time and resource cost. Engineering assets, bridging units, and airlift must be diverted. Supplies must be rerouted or airlifted, and forward units face limited options until lines are reconstituted. This is a precise tactical strike with campaign-level consequences, not because of a single munition's explosive yield, but because it weaponized geography. Ukraine's approach here was targeted, methodical, and designed to create cascade effects on supply, movement, and sustainment. For forces on both sides who operate in riverine theaters, the Belgorod Reservoir breach is now a template for how the interplay of precision fires, deception, and hydrology can be leveraged and must be defended against.